Hello, everyone. You're tuning in at X-Raced, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. My name is Miles, and it's always great to have you with us, especially when our show is joined by someone whose work has not only influenced industries around the world, but continues to shape how organizations think about people, capability, and long term sustainability. With over 40 years of experience guiding businesses toward excellence and real measurable value, he has become one of those respected voices in global learning and organizational development. He leads an ISO certified international educational organization, one that's been a founding member of the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, and a longtime advocate for integrating corporate sustainability into every core business process. He's passionate about elevating people, strengthening competence, and making quality something that spreads across industries in the best way possible. I'm talking about none other than the Managing Director and CEO of ACI Global and e-Quip, Ian Erskine. Hi, Ian. Welcome back.
And it's lovely to be back again,
Good
and welcome
morning.
to all our viewers. And again, I trust you've all had a wonderful weekend, enjoying with your family and all your friends. And yes, and again, keep up that wonderful exhibition of what's the word for brain speaking to others, which is your smile.
Thank you.
And yes, yes, and a very interesting topic which we're going to talk to about today with
Yeah.
interested parties and stakeholders.
Yeah, and I'm all prepped for this topic. You and your team take very, very seriously understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties and stakeholders, and why that understanding is becoming absolutely critical for organizations worldwide. And I know, Ian, ACI Global works with such an incredibly diverse range of learners, industries, and stakeholders, and you've built this framework that unites all of them through continuous improvement. So, to kick us off, what do you believe organizations need to understand today about the people and expectations that ultimately shape their success?
Well, I think this goes back to as an organization grows. So many organizations start with a business owner. One person has an idea of what they're actually going to or want to promote. Now, as they grow, it becomes abundantly clear that they obviously realize that the initial interested parties and stakeholders, which are the industry bodies and inevitably politicians, because politicians affect how industry and businesses operate.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got to look at your legal entity. So they're the traditional ones which you would have anyway, right? But as a business grows, for argument's sake, it might want to resource out its employment of new employees. So it goes to a resourcing employee body, and so you bring them on board. Now, this is where my initial discussions often start with an organisation where some of them have this mistaken belief that, okay, we'll hand that responsibility over to a company to look after our employees. Now, uh, and they sometimes forget that that is not being able to transfer that risk from yourself to an interested party. You still have the ultimate responsibility for when an employee comes on board for their understanding of their role, their
Mhm.
primary duty of care, for argument's sake, and again, their general understanding of their role within the organisation. That still is your primary duty of care. Okay, so I think that's a very important thing to remember. And also, as businesses grow, there has to be a realization that you just don't have that expertise in that certain field. And another one is accounts receivable. Okay, and that's an interesting one where I've always held on to that. We use MYOB, and I've held on to that specifically because right from the very word go, when we started the training company under on Eden Enterprises, one of the first things that we went into training was to train primary producers or farmers how to look after their own accounts, to have
Uh-huh.
an understanding that because farming can, particularly here in Australia, can be so variable. So, you can have your dry years, your wet years. Some years your income can be severely restricted, right? Other years you have an abundance of income coming in. So
Uh-huh.
you've got to be able to not only spend your money wisely, but you've also got to be able to save as well. So
Uh-huh.
hence, and again, that's very much the way I've structured ACI Global as a learning provider is always to be running positively and having a positive bank balance rather than running into a negative bank balance. Because if you start to do things like that, you put yourself at risk, and ultimately you put at risk, particularly for a training body like ACI Global, you
Uh-huh.
put our learners at risk, because if we go bankrupt, go out of business, our learners will suffer because they can't continue on their learning pathways for our lifelong learning and our induction and process like that. So again, this is where all these interested parties become part of the greater family, so to speak. And I
Yeah.
think that's the point that I need to get across there, is that interested parties and stakeholders are very much a very big part of your business.
Uh-huh.
Hence, they have to adhere to your ethics, your mission,
Right.
and your vision.
Uh-huh.
And because if not, you end up working poles apart, and ultimately the risk will be turned back on you, and it become a risk that you can't carry.
Yeah, right. And good thing you mentioned the political and legal factors as they really, greatly affect this space, Ian. It's just amazing how often businesses talk about growth and strategy, yet skip the foundational step of truly understanding who they're actually serving and who's impacted by their decisions. And it's one of those, simple but not easy concepts that can make or break effectiveness.
Very
Mhm.
true. And again, it gets back to people.
Yeah.
Everywhere you turn, and yeah, and it's quite a broad subject actually, because when you turn to it and have a look, ultimately it's always people we're dealing with,
Mhm.
whether they're interested party stakeholders or your own business, your own directors, your own employees. It always comes back to people.
Yeah. And since you've always said companies' greatest resource is its people, specifically their competence, their skills, and their capability. I love that perspective, by the way, because it goes beyond the usual people are our greatest asset slogan. So let me ask, how does ACI's accelerating continuous improvement model actually build those qualities in a way that creates real, measurable value for the organizations you work with?
Well, first and foremost, we've got to be very diligent in the interested parties that we work with, and our stakeholders. So at all times, number one, they have to understand where we're going. Again, they have to
Mhm.
understand our vision, and they
Direction.
also have to understand that they are a very big part of our mission for us to achieve our vision. Okay. So hence you have to look very carefully at how we put things in place. And again, one of our key stakeholders is the Global Reporting Initiative, which we hold very dear because we look at their principles, and their guiding principles is very much part of our vision and very much forms part of our mission to achieve our vision, right? And look, and often I say to people say to me, "Oh, do you ever have disagreements or arguments with your interested parties and stakeholders?"
Mhm.
Yes, sure we
Of
do.
course.
And the Global Reporting Initiative would be the first to admit that ACI and the GRI have locked horns in reference to so-called climate change, where I talk about changes to the climate,
Mhm.
sensible and sustainable environmental initiatives rather than knee-jerk, focus grouped, um, and unthought through ideals. And again, this is where when we're looking at our interested parties, again, going back to the vision and the mission, it has to stack up. It has to be based on real history, real science. And again, going back to what we said, it has to be based on people. Because
Mm-hmm.
if we don't base our model on people, and for our interested parties to understand that, we'll tend to go off sidetracked. And this is what I've been saying to a number of really big organisations as have started to contact myself personally and talking about their models where they've gone to machine learning. And they're now openly coming to me and talking about, well, we're losing, Ian, we're losing that focus of people because that's going to a
Right.
machine. Now, they've explained to me how at their very best, they're trying always to have that human or that people input. But they're now openly coming to me and saying that's pretty hard to do when a machine is actually answering and assessing the assessments. They're saying to me at the end of the day, they have to ultimately put someone in charge of that final tick, right? But at a lot of the times, they're now finding that the approval has come through and saying, no, no, everything's fine. Yet when the assessor has gone through that assessment and had a look at the response, it bears no resemblance to a practical solution that should have been put forward, which is
Uh-huh.
based on people.
Right. Uh-huh. And it really revolves around what the real goal or direction is of the whole organization. And from a business perspective, Ian, especially coming from sales and marketing, I've seen firsthand how small improvements in competence can create massive long term gains. And what you're describing really mirrors that experience. And ACI Global, as we know, is also a founding member of the Global Reporting Initiative, and your work is heavily guided by ISO 26000. These aren't just checkboxes, they shape the way organizations behave. How do these global frameworks influence the way you support businesses, especially when they're trying to strengthen sustainability, governance, and, of course, their overall stakeholder relationships?
Well, this is a very interesting one and a very powerful one indeed, because when we talk about not only the GRI but also ISO's 26,000 standard,
Mm-hmm.
both these bodies and particularly the ISO standard, they are purely guidance documents. They're not stated documents where you have to, or you need to be certified against, or you need to have an inspector come along and inspect you. They are purely guidance documents where you look at those to guide, use those as a guidance to further strengthen not just your mission, but they certainly strengthen your mission, right?
Okay.
Because you get a broader outlook from around the world of different perspectives, right? Different ways people think, right? And now we're seeing a lot of this now coming in the different thoughts people have in reference to a number of burning issues in the world today. And what we're finding is that we need to be actually go back to the very basics of understanding where we're now actually focusing a lot more on our leaders having the ability to learn, listen, reflect, and then be able ultimately to come up with a direction that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily fit everyone, right? But
Okay.
the direction fits the philosophy of it has to be right. It can't verge into that grey area between right and wrong, and
Uh-huh.
it definitely cannot be unethical or straight out wrong. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Now, this is where we're finding this issue is coming up more and more now. And this is what we discussed in our last episode, where our model now is becoming to concentrate a lot more on observational techniques,
Uh-huh.
observational assessments, observational learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? So learning from one another, that ability to be able to ask that probing question, have someone answer, and watching their mannerisms, listening to what they have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often I have to stop people and say, when I mean listening, do you truly understand that you have to actually work hard at stopping your brain because you ultimately have an answer to what your
Uh-huh.
question you're asking, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily have to be the correct answer because we live and learn from each other all the time.
Right.
And this is where I think the learning models of today are going to need to change to reflect the input of technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're going to have to go back and say, hang on, hold on. Learning cannot be taken away from a person's intelligence. And this is where I often amuse a lot of people when people come up and they're talking to me about AI and things like that. And I say, well, what do you understand by AI? So they rattle off a whole heap of things. And then I say, well, ultimately, what you're talking about is human intelligence. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And virtually 100 out of 100, they will come back and say, oh, no, we're talking about human intelligence. And I don't have to say anything more. Basically, they then come back to me and say, wow, now I really need to stop and think of what I'm allowing machine learning or the chatbot to be
Mm-hmm.
able to determine for me. And like I said, the lovely young lady, and you are going to meet her one day, very shortly. She said, she
Yeah.
feels so much better having taken that off her phone, the chatbot off her phone. She's now thinking a lot more. She's a lot more comfortable,
Yeah.
more understanding, more at ease and relaxing a lot more because
Mm-hmm.
she's the ultimately the one now that's saying to me, she's back in control again.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And yeah, and I guess that's what I'm saying. We have to always focus, and we've said it many times already in this interview.
Right.
People matter, and it's human intelligence.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very important distinction, Ian. From what you're saying, those frameworks give organizations a much clearer way to align what they say with what they do. And one thing clients consistently highlight is the sheer breadth of ACI's expertise, from ISO auditor training to personal certification pathways to industry specific programs like heavy vehicle systems or cybersecurity. With so many areas of capability, Ian, how do you decide which programs to prioritize? I mean, how do these offerings help organizations benchmark and elevate their performance in areas like product development, service quality, workforce management, or even data and cybersecurity?
Well, I think that's where, particularly with learning providers, they must be prepared to have a wide range platform.
Uh-huh.
Um, and look, I can understand where people want to just be specifically concentrating on specific areas. That's fine, but where I get a little bit concerned with that is everyone that is going through a learning journey does not necessarily want to stop at just one point. As we said, one of the inspirations that I get out from my cancer journey is the Julie Anthony's movie Climb Every Mountain with the
Uh-huh.
main song,
I remember.
right? And that's what I try and challenge everyone, okay? Because they come to, for argument's sake, they'll come to us and they'll come from an industry and they say, look, I just basically want to do, I've been in a truck driving trucks for years. I now want to be on the other side and start to audit and improve techniques of businesses that are managing drivers to the point where you can't allow a driver to drive too many hours because they get too fatigued, too tired. So they come to us and they say, look, I want to do heavy vehicle auditing. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll quite often have a look at their background and say, gee, I said, I think my advice will be, we'll put you in a broader course. And that way, then you can actually audit. And you may even audit a small food business, for argument's sake, because as a driver, you've demonstrated to me that you've driven coolers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you carted food in your cooler and so forth. So you as a driver have that understanding that that cooler has to be running at all times. You
Mm-hmm.
have to understand before you pick up your food delivery, your cooler vat has to be cold. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just switch it on when you get there, put the stuff in,
Right.
because the cold stuff will then thaw out and then begin to get cold again. So it's a bit like, and I know many people have done it. They've taken a pie from a warmer that's been given to them, that's been frozen, right? And they've started to eat it, and it's been cold at the top and warm in the centre, right?
Yeah.
That's a classic case where you've had that inconsistency in the warming and the thawing and the cooling out process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the point I'm making there is what we endeavour to do with our learning model is to understand all our learners and our beneficiaries, which are the sponsoring organisations and our stakeholders. They're on a journey, basically, of inspiration, discovery, of doing better all the time to become
Mm-hmm.
high achievers,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things we look for, particularly in our supporting bodies, and even now where we're now spending probably even more time as previously in supporting our sponsoring organisations, where the learners do their learning, which is sometimes their own organisation, which could be one we've found for them, right?
Uh-huh.
But we do that because we know if there's that joint togetherness between the sponsoring organisation and the learner, the
Okay.
pathway becomes clearer. There
Mm-hmm.
can't be any roadblocks put in front of the learner. The learner has to, and even a business must understand from the director, from the owner down, they have to be prepared to allow their employees to actually learn faster and maybe want to jump the rungs faster than
Mm-hmm.
even themselves.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is again very much where the joint alliance between the interested parties, the stakeholders, even all the way down to the
Mm-hmm.
legal bodies, where there's no such thing as ifs or buts. You have to obey by the law.
Uh-huh.
And again, a classic one of that is payment rates and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If in your country there's a law which states you have to pay the minimum pay rate, you
Mm-hmm.
can't cut that or move that. That's a legal requirement. There's no ifs and buts.
Yeah. And it's
Okay,
important to
so
comply.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like an ecosystem. I mean, capability with learning. Businesses often try to fix performance issues in isolation, but what you're explaining is the complete opposite, building strength across interconnected areas so the whole organization improves together. And it's very aligned with modern business resilience with people at the center. And we're also aware that organizations are facing more pressure than ever from stakeholders, regulators, as you mentioned earlier, and even customers like us who expect transparency and accountability. So, from your vantage point, Ian, where do you see the biggest opportunities for ACI Global and e-Quip to support organizations moving forward? And how do you see your training and certification programs evolving to meet these growing global expectations?
well, I think it gets back to the model that we are offering, which is the LMS and the CMS through the ISO e-Quip quality software.
Mm-hmm.
And um, it's something where I think we will be pushing very strongly is for organisations and businesses, even universities and extra colleges, to understand that they have to have robust systems in place so that they can manage that journey of the candidate. And that journey of the candidate is the thing that matters. The journey of that candidate has to be put in place in such a way that it fosters the learner to understand, wow, I will continue to climb those mountains. I
Mm-hmm.
will continue to do better. I will understand that I'm going to learn from my mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I will understand that I'm not going to be catastrophized or penalised in any way if I want to move faster than someone else, or even I move faster than the owner or the director of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I need, or learners need to be able to understand at all times someone is going to be there to assist them in that learning process.
Mm-hmm.
And hence, that's where it becomes oh so important for the learning body to be able to have a robust set of interested parties and stakeholders in support of the learning body's vision and, above all, its mission. And again, this works just not just for learning providers, this works for all businesses, okay, whether it's a cafe, whether it's a legal franchise, whether it's a business that sells motor cars, whether it's a business that actually goes out and looks after gardens and parklands and things like that. They have to understand that they're doing that for people's benefit.
Uh-huh.
And again, we come back to that age thing. People matter. Okay. And this is where we must not ever lose sight of that fact in all this. And again, within all your interested parties and your stakeholders, within each of those bodies are people.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what, again, has to be fostered from our perspective, because we've gone out and embraced those interested parties and stakeholders. We've embraced them to be part of our model. So it's up to us to ensure, again, as I said before, they truly do understand our vision and our mission
Mm-hmm.
and are very much part of that process.
Right. And that forward thinking approach, Ian, is exactly why companies trust you. You are absolutely giving enough confidence to your learners, and it makes them want to learn some more. Hearing how you're preparing leaders and organizations despite this AI age for what's coming next is incredibly grounding. It also echoes something we talk about a lot here on X Ray: success belongs to those who stay adaptable. So, thank you so much for reminding us that businesses don't exist in isolation, but rather within networks of people, responsibilities, expectations, and impacts. We always appreciate your time and your generosity, of course, to share your experience, Ian. Thank you.
Yes, and look, just as we finalise and finish up
Mhm.
this interview, I would just also like to remind everyone that this even goes further than what we've been discussing. This even goes to the people that we put our trust in uh, to run our lives, and that is politicians.
I
Okay.
agree.
Now, one of the things that I would like people to understand is we have, for many, many episodes, and even before that, we spent a lot of time in talking about the capability of people,
Uh,
the ability for them to learn, the ability for them all to have key performance indicators, KPPIs,
mhm.
right, and to achieve those objectives and targets.
Yeah,
Now, what I'm now employing on people to do is expect that from their political leaders.
I agree. And I
They
hope
have to be,
everyone's paying close attention to these.
yes, they need to be answerable to their own electorates, right?
Uh-huh.
Because you'll hear a politician, and to me, they just mouth motherhood statements where they come back and say, "Oh, we're answerable to our electorates," and so forth like that. How many times over the last 5 to 10 or 15 years have we seen politicians just running their own race, not taking any notice of the people that elect them, and then they wonder why they get voted out?
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be more key PPIs for politicians, and they must reflect the people that vote them in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Well said.
so it may sound a little bit of a side issue, but it's
Uh-huh.
not. It's very much in what
But
we're talking about,
uh-huh.
interested parties and stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians are part of everyone's lives, yet we
Yeah.
just we just say, oh, we'll just vote them in and everything will be fine. We need to be a little bit more choosy and demanding of
I
our politicians as learners demand from myself, okay? Because we have to perform. If we don't perform, we won't have people to be able to learn people.
agree.
We're
Well
trying
said,
to.
Ian, and I completely agree. I hope everyone heard that well. So, for those watching or listening to our podcast who want to take the next step, whether it's personal certification, organizational training, ISO development, or simply understanding how to build capability within your teams, ACI Global and Equip are incredible resources. Visit the links below to learn more. Thanks for being with us and keeping conversations like this alive. Catch Ian again in our next episodes. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused, driven, and inspired with X-Raced.